Hi everyone, my name is Lindley Gallegos and I have chosen to read The Defining Decade by Meg J. Overall, I loved the book. I think you should read it. I think it's powerful. I shared it all over social media. And I think you're going to really I'm going to show you the end part of her TED Talk, but I'm going to jump right into my presentation with you. So I chose a Prezi, and we will just jump right in. So I chose, like I said, The Defining Decade by Meg J. Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now. Meg J is known to say, your 20s, 20 is not the new 30, which is a coined term that's really popular right now. And she is a clinical psychologist who has spent the greater part of her career helping 20-year-olds navigate the decade and grow in life and business and health. And she's taken all of her work and done a ton of research on 20s and what this decade really means. So she has an awesome TED Talk, and obviously we don't have time to cover it all, but I'm going to show you a little piece of it. And I think it kind of encompasses what she really wants you to get out of it. And jump right to the end.
Working with 20-somethings, they are so easy to help. 20-somethings are like airplanes just leaving LAX, bound for somewhere west. Right after takeoff, a slight change in course is the difference between landing in Alaska or Fiji. Likewise, at 21 or 25 or even 29, one good conversation, one good break, one good TED Talk can have an enormous effect across years and even generations to come. So here's an idea worth spreading to every 20-something you know. It's as simple as what I learned to say to Alex. It's what I now have the privilege of saying to 20-somethings like Emma every single day. 30 is not the new 20, so claim your adulthood, get some identity capital, use your weak ties, pick your family. Don't be defined by what you didn't know or didn't do. You're deciding your life right now. Thank you.
So I think that's powerful. Little spoiler alert, here's one of the final quotes in her book. But I love it. I think it's very powerful. She says, "The future isn't written in the stars. There are no guarantees. So claim your adulthood, be intentional, get to work, pick your family, do the math, make your own certainty. Do not be defined by what you didn't know or didn't do. You are deciding your life now." These are the important things that we need to be saying to 20-year-olds. So my analysis of the book, these are some of the subsections that really resonated with me, and I'm going to kind of just talk about them a little bit. The first one was identity capital. And identity capital is, as defined by Meg J, is our collection of personal assets. It's the repertoire of individual resources that we assemble over time. These are the investments we make in ourselves, the things we do well enough or long enough that they become part of who we are. These are things, like references, jobs we do, programs we participate in, leadership conferences. All of those things are so important to attend and make part of your life in your 20s. It's imperative that students create identity capital in their 20s so they're not getting entry-level jobs in their 30s. Another thing she loves to talk about, which really resonated with me, is the urban tribe. The urban tribe is a collection of like-minded 20-year-olds that it's kind of their, live and work in family that they've assembled themselves. They spend most of their time with. Tends to be a group that all thinks alike, has the same interests, and doesn't really venture far outside of their bubble. While that's awesome, on the relationship front, it's not great professionally. What she thinks is super important is to create weak ties. Strong ties are those that are directly connected to you, your best friends, your immediate family, all that. Weak ties are your dad's best friend's cousin's uncle who owns a company that you want to work in someday, or a past professor that you kind of remembered, but could really help you nail down that internship. Those are weak ties. Those are the ties that we really need to be making in our 20s. There's a quote here as I flip through my book. And she says, weak ties are people we've met or connected to somehow that we do not currently know well. Maybe they're coworkers we rarely talk to, or the neighbor we only say hello to. We all have acquaintances we keep meaning to go out with but never do, and friends we lost touch with years ago. Weak ties are also former employers or professors or any other associations who have not been promoted to close friends. It's important to keep these people around because they help us to think differently, they help us think outside the box, and they may really be the ones that can help pull us up in the world. So your brain is still developing. Jay talks a lot in her book about how in your 20s, you have your second and final growth spurt in your mind, right? So this plasticity in your brain, you're having the last little bit of it in that 20s decade, and it's important to capitalize on it. So you need to be learning how to have critical thinking skills. You need to be making good decisions. If there's something you don't like about yourself, it's the 20s decade that you really can work on that, whether it's personality trait that you want to change, a habit, those kind of things. Your brain is still plastic enough to where it can change before it really settles down into a strong foundation. And we all need to take the time to point that out to 20-year-olds, and as 20-year-olds, capitalize on that last growth spurt. The other sections that kind of go hand in hand for me that Jay hit on were dating down and fertility peaks. In her book, she has a section called the cohabitation effect. And cohabitation is essentially living together before marriage. And I read this quote and it shocked me just because I have so many friends living together outside of marriage. But this is a quote from her book, and it says, couples who live together first are actually less satisfied with their marriages and more likely to divorce than couples who do not. This is what sociologists call the cohabitation effect. So that's scary. A lot of people are moving in together before marriage, and it's something that we really need to think about. I think what's happening and what she talks about, having seen it, is that people move in together out of convenience, girlfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. They are in a place in their relationship where they're spending a lot of time with each other, and it's inconvenient and more expensive to pay 2 rents. So they just end up moving together and not really thinking that person is their soulmate, but thinking, I probably won't end up with this person, but for now, it's going to be the most convenient. Convenience is a threat to our 20-year-olds. So what happens is by the time they hit that 30, it's like, oh my gosh, I have to get married. So they end up marrying that person anyways, and likely could be in a toxic relationship, or it wasn't the best thing for that person. The other thing she talked about was fertility. And as this current generation likes to say, 30 is the new 20, I'll worry about kids later. That's a problem. Fertility for women are the most fertile between 25 and 30. The most fertile. At 30, your fertility drops in half, and each year after that, it drops in half again. So if you want to put off having kids until you're 30, it may be too late. You may be visiting infertility clinics, and it just may not be as seamless as you think it will be. If you keep putting it off, then you're not creating that timeline, you could have problems down the road. The last little bullet here was her section on forward thinking. It's imperative that students and 20-year-olds alike think ahead and create, start thinking about what they want their future to look like. It's not the time to be traveling the world unemployed for 10 years, because you come out on the other side with no identity capital, no strong relationship, and your brain isn't as plastic as it used to be. You have no weak ties, all of that. So I think it's really important that 20s think about the future. And that was this point that she really wanted to drive home. I'm going to read to you a section of her book in that forward thinking chapter. She says, "It is easy to feel overwhelmed by uncertainty, to want to lie low with the urban tribe or our parents until our brains just mature on their own and somehow suddenly know the sure answers to our lives. But that's not how the brain works. That's not how life works. Besides, even if our brains could wait, love and work can't. The 20s are indeed the time to get busy. It's forward thinking for an uncertain age." I love that. So consider this. This is one of the opening quotes in her book. 80% of life's most defining decisions are made by the age of 35. So if you're over than 35, you're looking at this quote, I hope you're doing a little bit of reflecting. But yeah, that's huge, huge. Long-term, down the road, your happiness, what you're doing, most of your decisions are going to be made before the age of 35. So it's imperative that 20s are using their time wisely and really shooting for their dreams and making things happen. Why you need to read this book. So Jay talks about her intended audience, which I love. She says the intended audience for her book is mostly, obviously, 20-somethings, but also people who work with 20-somethings, people who love a 20-something, people who are losing sleep over a 20-something. Odds are you fall into one of those categories. All of us interact with 20-somethings, adolescents, those right out of college who are embarking on this new decade. What about us, higher ed professionals? Our work revolves around 20-somethings in their future. So we need to know and understand Jay's work and how we can better counsel, mentor, and push 20s to be the best that they can be. So I took Aston's IEO model here in Jay's metaphor for this, the 20-year-old being like an airplane that takes off, right, out of NYC. And she says if they take off from there, small changes make the difference between landing in Alaska and Fiji or wherever else, right? So I think of us in higher ed as those small, minor alterations in course that can help students really decide where it is, where the landing destination is, where they end up. So we are a huge piece of that E, the experience in the IEO model. Our opinions matter more to 20s than you think they do. They're listening and they are engaging with you. And when you have a 20-something in your presence, it's important that you let them know that this is the time for them to create that identity capital. This is the time in their lives where they actually are going to be picking their families and establishing those strong or not outcomes at the end of it all. And here's what I'm left with. I have questions. I don't know what the answers are, the best way to shape and direct 20-year-olds. But here's my questions for you and for anybody who really works with 20-year-olds. Given what we know about the importance of the 20s decade, how can we steer students? So we know their brains are plastic. They're still changing. We know that, there are dangers in moving in with a significant other if you're not sure. We know that there's dangers in not getting internships and not getting into the work world early enough to create identity capital. Given what we know, how do we steer students? That's my first question. And if I were answering it, I would say the best thing that we can do is let them know that these are the pros and cons of hitting these benchmarks, and do with your 20s what you will, but it's the defining decade. It's gonna make the difference in the end about where you end up in the world. So when a student tells you, I'm dropping out of school to travel the world and find myself, what do you answer? I feel like I've gotten that question a lot working with students in my office in admission. And I think it's important that you encourage students to travel and say that's great. But while you're doing that, how are you making weak ties? How are you creating identity capital? Where are your relationships at? You don't want to be 30 and trying to figure all that stuff out. You don't want to be coming up from the backside of your generation. You want to be in the front. You want to be leading the pack. So I think asking those questions of students is really important. And the third question is, how do we prepare students earlier for life in their 20s? When and where and how do these conversations start? I don't know where the rhetoric for 30 is the new 20 came from, but it's out there, and people are joking, students move back in with their parents right after graduation. Students live with roommates until the average age of 32, and it's just, it's in the media and we see it. But how do we prepare students earlier so that they can start their lives earlier? Because it makes a difference. And I'm not exactly sure what the answer is to that, but I think those conversations really need to start in the teens, in the teen years. And it's important that we bring students up to speed quicker so that they're not getting an entry-level job at age 30. It's so important to help. For us, I think it's almost our duty to help shape these students as soon as we can really get our hands on them and let them know what the environment is like. So here's my references, and that's my presentation. Let's see if I can get my video back up. Awesome. Thanks for listening, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my presentation. I absolutely loved reading this book. I think everyone should read this book, and if you know somebody in their 20s, it's a really good Christmas present. In the last couple weeks, I've been sharing it to all of my friends and family alike. I think the work that Jay has done, it's moved me, and at 24, and I'm glad that I've learned it at this age, but I still think that we need to share it around. So thanks for your time.